everybody. We are back for our discussion. Thank you all for sticking with us. And so that was wonderful to see it all the way through. I hadn't seen it straight through for a while, so it was fun to sit and watch it with everybody. It's funny how it's a different experience viewing something when you know other people's watching it. It's like one of the particles that change because you know you're watching it. We were just talking, my mom and I were just talking about that. Some scientist knows the answer to this.
Heisenberg uncertainty.
Heisenberg, right? The ones that change because you know you're watching it. We've been thinking about that all week since I listened to that Radio Lab or whatever that was a couple weeks ago. All right, so I'm turning it over to our moderators now. Off you go. Guys.
Yeah, all right.
Wonderful.
Let's kick this off.
Well, I guess I have a question to start us off. In the play, the characters share with each other how they got into their fields, and it just happened that they tied it back to their families. But I wanted to ask our two guests how you decided to get into your fields and what you're studying, and does it have any connection to your parents?
Well, I got into computer science because I went to an undergraduate institution that had 6 majors, and the other 5 of them required actually being good at bench work, and I'm really bad at bench work. So it was computer science or math, and I did both, and that's what I'm still doing today. It did not involve my parents. My dad's an MD. He's much better at bench work. I would hope. I've never watched it in action, but I'm guessing he's better at bench work than I am.
But you have that that similar brain, right?
In a way, yeah, I guess so.
Can you tell me what bench work is? Maybe.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so the scientists who actually do stuff and make science happen with pipettes. I did a postdoc in neuroscience, and so I got to learn exactly how bad at bench work I still am. It was terrible as an undergrad. And then I get there and I had to learn how to do stuff with worms because they want me to at least get certified in worms. You're never gonna do anything with worms. It was important for some grant that I was one of the people certified with worms. And completely botch it. And then I go directly from that worm training to a science festival that we're holding for the community in San Diego, and another postdoc's 4-year-old daughter out pipettes me. And at that point, I just get up and I'm like, okay, I'm done now. And I go man the front desk. And so that bench work is all the things you imagine scientists actually do that isn't sitting at a computer, which is basically all I do.
It's mostly transferring tiny amounts of liquid from one place to another place over and over and over again.
Tiny amounts of liquid though, without saying, close enough.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. I had never heard that term, bench work. Thank you for asking, Nichole.
Mm-hmm. We learned something new. That's why we do these talkbacks, right? Yeah, Charlie?
Animals are kind of another type of bench work, which is not actually done on a bench.
Much better.
Unless they're worms.
That's true.
I got into neuroscience through philosophy, actually. And wanting to answer these big philosophical questions, and then figured it would be more useful to actually do science instead of just talk about other people's results. And then I went also going to med school, probably in part because my parents are in medicine, and that's a fair thing. They're big influences on your life, whether you want them to be or not.
Totally. Cool. So we got some good background inspiration. I'm wondering, I guess we could start with a simple question. How did this play make you feel? Maybe we could just kind of start there and go forward. Either of you.
The computer scientist in me, right, wants to pick apart all the computer science and talk about how, there are issues with using TSP to try to solve a genetic algorithm or whatever that was actually trying to do. But that is irrelevant to, I think, the moral of the story. And so, trying to put my grown-up hat on where I'm not that 14-year-old nerd who wants to go and say something's wrong on the internet.
But we do want to know what's right and wrong about the
yeah, if you were going to be your inner 14-year-old nerd, what would you tell us is wrong? Because I want to know.
I could tell you that, well, for first thing, models are actually really well accepted. So there's typical computational models and not genetic algorithms. So genetic algorithms are actually really slow, and they're very prone to hitting something called a local minima. So imagine like you're in a really bumpy countryside and you want to get to the tallest mountain. Anytime you get to a hill, you're going to think you're on the tallest mountain. And so it's very easy for genetic algorithms to end up on some random hill that's nowhere near where you want to be because a lot of them look the same. And so there are a lot of other techniques that one would do for that, and none of them involve anything with NP completeness. So NP completeness means things are hard, but it only means things are hard when they're very, very big, right? If n is, in the hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands or millions, it's all the same. You can still solve it very quickly for most things. So something that, like say when you're if you want to multiply every set of pairs of numbers, right? That runs in n squared time, right? So because you're running n by n. If you want to multiply e to the n numbers, all of a sudden you're in something non-polynomial. And so that gets much, much slower, but it's still small as long as n is small, which is probably too much detail.
No, I love it. That's interesting from the computational side, because on my side of things, I kept thinking about like all of my time in the lab, like, okay, so A, B, C, D, E, F, and G are true. So like Y should be true when it never is. It's never that simple. And so, one of the biggest things I learned during my PhD was just like, you can hypothesize all day long, but like nature's going to throw like a wrench in all your plans. So I guess for me, what kind of, I just kept thinking about was like this algorithm can never, show you what you would actually get. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. Biology is crazy hard.
It's crazy.
I'm doing an environmental, like a pollution modeling project with the environmental health department right now. And there's just so much going on. We have like 400 features and we're scratching the surface and we're like guessing like, oh yeah, within 100 kilometers, we can guess how much air pollution there is. That's the best we can do.
Yeah, and I don't want to I'm going to be an annoying nerd really quick.
Yay!
I did a bunch of yeast 2 hybrid screening in 2008, and I found my lab notebook while we were sitting here, and I was just trying to remind myself, like, okay, so the basis of this is she's doing this yeast 2 hybrid screening experiment, and when I did these, the output was like you look at bacterial or yeast colonies, so it's either blue or like it's like either blue and like bright blue or like less blue or like not there. And so like the type of data that we would get would just be like, this was on May 27th of 2008, but we would do like pluses and minuses, like 2 pluses or a plus minus. So I'm wondering, just like the input into the algorithm made me kind of like,
Yeah, like data cleaning's most of the work, honestly. Like that's, yeah. I would give a student a full month to do that.
Yeah, there are also
a student who knew this stuff.
Yeah, sorry, there were just a few things. Well, okay, maybe I'll throw it to you guys. Did anything make you want to scream, either of you?
Oh my God, she was sleeping with her advisor. What the hell?
Yeah, I felt that way too.
So many levels of that, okay?
Yeah.
I kind of treated that like it was like, oh yeah, this is gonna happen, and
no, never.
That's
it's like sleeping with your dad. That's just ew.
Yeah, that's really messy and gross. I don't know about you guys, but what I wanted to scream about was just like when he said, "Oh, you can borrow my mice," and I would just like wanted to explode and die. Like so my dad and I are both microbiologists. I really do what he did, but here I am. And when he was in grad school, they would do experiments on animals where like he would do experiments specifically where you had to hold a cat in place while people drilled like screws into the cat's brain. No anesthesia, nothing. We have come a long way from that. And now there are a lot of regulations. You have to jump through all these hoops and do all these things so that you make sure like this is really important research. This is exactly why we're doing. This is exactly how we're going to do it. You can't just go around swapping mice. Get out of here. So I was just like, when he said that part.
Typical I saw from a biology side was that like making a knockout model like is a PhD thesis that like it can take years, and it's kind of like a running joke is like whatever you do, don't do a novel mouse knockout model because it won't work and you'll waste 3 years of your life. That is like one of the most constant strains of advice every young graduate student gets.
I like that.
What
That's
does a
really funny.
knockout model mean?
So it's if you want to understand what something does in a system, you take it out and see, does it break? Does it do some other weird function? And that's all it is you're taking out the gene, which in this case is the protein. The proteins do all the stuff. So what happens to the cells or what happens to the animals when you take out that protein? And yeah, lots of interesting things happen. The person who was the Chinese doctor who used CRISPR to genetically modify an embryo so that it couldn't be infected by HIV. That's basically what he did. Was he knocked out a protein that HIV uses to get access to the cells, and kind of the ethical conundrum with that is, well, we don't know what's going to happen when you do this to an embryo. Like, what happens when you're missing that protein? Sure, you can't get HIV, but we don't know what else might happen, when they're
Mhm.
8.
Yeah, that's a really risky move. That was very risky. Let's see what other things that I was thinking of.
Audience questions? Anybody have things from the audience?
Yeah, Danny. Yeah. You were a little quiet, so I'm just going to repeat. Do any of the audience members have questions you want to ask? You're welcome to put them in the chat or come up on screen. Call yourself into space.
I wanted to have Charlie were telling me about the monogamy, and I just was interested in that before, about what your research is about that. You want to talk about that a little bit? Because I thought that we were talking about jealousy. You said I researched jealousy. I was like, what? And then you started talking about monogamy and polygamy and mice. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So it has its applications to what's in the play too.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, as far as how the play made me feel, I thought it was a really realistic look at relationship dynamics. Actually, the first thing that really struck me was just how awesome it is that people are doing this during COVID over Zoom and like writing a play through this medium, because it really is like a new medium. And future technology might utilize things a lot more like this. So I thought that was really cool. But like, jealousy is what we kind of understand about the way love works in the brain is that when you fall in love with somebody, oxytocin, this chemical, gets released, and it primes your brain to form all of these, to change, to rewire in a way that makes you fall in love. And oxytocin gets released when you give birth, when you breastfeed, when you have sex, when you look in your dog's eyes, like whenever you're bonding with someone else. And what happens in your brain is like the memory trace, like the set of brain cells that encode your concept of this other person, gets hardwired into your reward center, an area called the nucleus accumbens. And whenever you think about that person or see that person or interact with them, you get a little burst of dopamine, which gives you pleasure. It really works the same way a drug addiction does. It like works the same way like cocaine does. And that's why, like, if you're depressed at work and you're sitting there and you look over and you see a picture of your loved one that you keep next to your desk, it cheers you up because the thought of them triggers this little dopamine burst in your reward system. And as you go through a breakup or something, you're essentially going through withdrawals of this neurochemical. So they follow, a lot of the same patterns. And one of those things is, jealousy. You have this resource, this other person is a sort of resource, and you want to protect your resources, just like a dog protects its food. But people have different definitions of jealousy. Charles Darwin wrote about dogs being jealousy and it being this basic emotion that evolved for obvious reasons. Today's researchers think that jealousy can't exist in anyone other than humans because it requires abstract thinking and like the concept of a love triangle and things like that. But we're trying to show it in rodents, in these little monogamous rodents we work with. It's kind of like a fun side project, but I can't say it's worked yet.
How would you go about showing it in rodents?
I mean, this is kind of like the the binding problem or the crux of all neuroscience is like we're trying to take something abstract like thoughts or an emotional state or something and figure out how that gets instantiated in biology. And it's kind of like the chicken and the egg problem they alluded to in the play. There's no answer for you to compare it to. You look at behavior, and what we actually do is separate the male and female partners, the little husband and wife animals, and we prime the female with estrogen so that she's sexually receptive. And then we put a little barrier between them and make the male watch while a stranger bull chases her around. And they get very upset and they try to get through the barrier and things like that.
Oh my God.
Pretty,
Wow.
yeah, it's pretty twisted. But
That's even better than I expected the answer to be. Wow.
emotional, it's not this.
Yeah,
We
that's
do
all.
have a follow-up question in the chat from Michelle Ford, asking or saying that very interested in your research on relationships at the beginning versus in the middle. Michelle, is there anything you want to add to that, or we'll just go with what you wrote?
No, thanks for taking my question. It's absolutely on the same lines of some of the research he was just sharing, but just what do you see at the beginning with oxytocin versus later on in the middle? What happens with the brain chemistry?
So it kind of follows the same track as any other addiction, and it's not to say that it's an addiction, but that's kind of like the model that I think most of the evidence kind of suggests is an apt way to think about a social bond like this, where you go through kind of this honeymoon period where like it feels great to do cocaine and you like want to keep doing cocaine because it feels good, but then after a while you keep doing cocaine because it feels really bad not to do cocaine. And that same sort of thing happens in relationships. Like you become used to the other person, you build up a tolerance just like you do a drug, and then what actually keeps bringing you back to them is the fact that you have these withdrawal symptoms. And it's like, we've probably all been in a relationship that like, we don't really want to be in this relationship. We're not really excited about it anymore, but like, God, the idea of being single really sucks. And you keep going back to them, or you break up and you go back to them. We see this pattern in human behavior all the time. And it fits the same behavioral profile as addiction. You're really kind of getting withdrawals for that person. The person themselves is a drug. Something else they talk about in relationships is like the 7-year itch, which can happen in like marriages. And I don't know as much about that, but it does seem to sort of, like, the timeline makes sense for reproducing, right? Like you fall in love with this person and you make a baby, and then, the sort of withdrawal from this person keeps you around long enough to raise the offspring. And by the time they're like 7 years old and they can go out and, not get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, you lose interest in that person and you move on and you find someone else to reproduce with. So you're, increasing the genetic diversity in the species.
Yeah, you were talking earlier about monogamy versus polygamy and what makes something monogamous, or how that works, and the research that you're doing too.
Yeah, this isn't research that I'm doing, but it's kind of a trend that you see in different animal species, that when there is an abundance of resources, that will favor a polygamous breeding system. And if there's a scarcity of resources, it will favor a monogamous breeding system. And we see this in our little voles that, neighboring species that are basically identical, but they're polygamous instead of monogamous. Their environments are very different. If you think about it, like if you are in this desolate, post-apocalyptic environment and you don't see a potential mate very often, there's not much food and there's a lot of predators, then when you finally stumble into a viable mate, the most evolutionarily sound strategy is to huddle up with them and reproduce as much as possible with just this one person. And then for both of you to invest your resources into caring for the offspring so that they're more likely to survive. If, on the other hand, you're in this, sort of Eden-esque environment where there are no predators and there's lots of food and there's lots of potential mates, then it makes the most sense to have a polygamous reproductive system where you find a different mate all the time and you can mate with them and reproduce, and you don't have to take care of the children together because they're not going to get eaten by anything, and there's plenty of food. So, there's no pressure. So there's no cost to reproducing with as many different partners as possible, which is actually the most, evolutionarily viable strategy. And there's one species of monkey, I think it's a type of baboon, that will actually switch from a polygamous, like a totally polygamous social structure to, I think, a patriarchal, like harem monogamous structure, depending on the availability of resources at the time.
Wow, that's so interesting. That is not at all anything that I thought.
I love what you're saying about building up a tolerance too, because that's so in the play. It's like, do we build up a tolerance? Like he keeps building up a tolerance, and then he's like, that I'm too tolerant. It's not interesting anymore. And I'm so afraid of that. It's a chemical thing too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm wondering if anything like struck a particular chord, or if anything really resonated. Like for me, I probably related to the pee thing more than anything else. I pee all the time. But I'm sure if anything came up for you guys at all as you were watching.
Maybe just, being really excited about a problem and then working, you're like, nope, close, useful, but not it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a feeling I think we've all had.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I thought the representation just of like personalities and relationships, like especially like grad students are in a very high pressure situation, just like academia in general is like very high pressure, stressful, like yeah, I thought it was interesting the way that the characters were portrayed and the way that they interacted. I think it was pretty dead on, probably.
That's kind of weird they had their own apartments.
Yeah, right?
Like what grad student can afford that?
Right. Oh, man.
It was convenient for the play anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair.
What else was I thinking of?
It was funny. I had, Idemar has another interview that I listened to today about, and he's talking about this play. They did it once in New York, and then he kept going back. He felt like it wasn't solved. Like he did it and he just said, that's not it. And he kept going back to it. And just like a year and a half ago, he had another production and he said, I think I got the answer to it. And the quote that's in the play is, I left it alone and I worked on something else. Isn't that how it always happens? And what he said was, the minute I said, I'm just going to leave it alone, and I went and worked on this other next thing, because like 6 months later, I came back to it and I went, I know the answer. I know what's wrong. And then he took it to another theater and did it like a year and a half ago, after 7 or 8 years had passed since he first started working on it. So I don't know. It was interesting to me how I had not heard that line before when I was watching today. And I had just listened to that interview. So I was like, okay, I got to ask you tomorrow about that when we're on tomorrow. So.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think that applies in a lot of different situations. And I guess I feel like in science, like, it's just going to be really elusive, and you just have to be really resilient and really patient. And yeah, I don't know.
And then celebrate when you get it.
Yeah.
Celebrate hard.
Yep.
They're long in between. What about the thing, they talked a lot about the barriers coming down between different disciplines. To what degree is that real? Is that really active in the sciences right now?
There's a lot of funding agencies have major pushes, especially from where I'm looking. AI kind of wants to eat everybody up, right? And so there are a lot of National Science Foundation level initiatives to say AI in environment, AI in health, AI in homeland security, and then there are many all these things. There's like AI in. Otherwise, there's always been a lot of, yes, we should be better, but interdisciplinary. Some of the efforts are better thought out than others. But I think that there's generally a desire for it, but it's often hard to translate the language.
Yeah, I feel like there's a pressure. I don't know, this is kind of a half-formed thought, but I feel like when I was going through grad school, there was this pressure, like you have to know what you're talking about. You have to like use the same words that I'm using. And I think there's so much power in that interdisciplinary interaction, but I think it's a little bit scarier because just like Avani said, like you're using slightly different languages. Like even when I was in the biochem department, even the lab beside us use very different jargon, even though we're both in the biochem department, you know? So I think that it can just be a little bit difficult, a little bit trickier, like uncomfortable to try to, you know, communicate things from different angles. And I think that vulnerability isn't always something that scientists are drawn to. That's just my feeling.
Yeah, that gets much easier when you're faculty because you need to like explain that more. Make sure you think it out, and then you can have all of the students from both sides of the divide talk about it, and then by the end you kind of know what we're talking about, but you're not expected to actually know anything, which is lovely because then you can sort of play the mediator.
When you're a faculty, you mean?
Yeah.
I love that.
That was much easier than when I was a postdoc. I had to try to learn this stuff.
Yeah, I really think that's where the magic happens, where like the overlaps between fields, like that messy space.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, they always say you have to bring somebody in from a totally different thing to solve the problem. You know, it's the person that comes with the completely different perspective that goes, that shakes it up and goes, what? You know, but how do you talk the language even to come in and do that, you know, to let somebody allow you in? And then they'll think you're crazy for 200 years before they...
Yeah. Well, there's just so much pressure to like be quiet and say what you're supposed to say, kind of, I guess. I don't know. I had a sort of traumatizing experience in academia. So, you know, I think you're totally right, though. I think like we need more fresh voices and fresh minds to bring like left field ideas, because that, you know, that's where the growth happens. That's right.
And I mean, graduate students should not be quiet. So whoever is telling you that, or is ever telling you that, yeah. No, not very good advice. Grad students should be loud and annoying because how else will we know we're wrong?
Yeah, if you can't be loud and annoying when you're young, when can you be, right? Hold on. Yeah, I talk about your Kellie. Just talk about you. You were telling us in the green room in our little break room about what you're doing with your storytelling thing. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, if anyone's interested, I am a producer for Story Collider. I know Mark's been to several of our shows. Basically we work with scientists to tell true personal stories about science. So we get scientists to talk about their feelings. Sometimes we get what we like to joke as normal humans to talk about science, and really finding those entry points into, you know, just making science more accessible and I guess drawing attention to science being everywhere and for everyone, even if it doesn't feel that way. If you're interested in learning more, you should go to storycollider.org. I think we're having between 3 and 4 shows a month. So we're doing some story slams once a month where you can throw your name in the hat. And if you get your name drawn, then you can tell a 5-minute story. But otherwise, we're doing some kind of like regional shows. And we're also doing some storytelling workshops. So if you check out our website, you can find lots of details there.
So kind of like the moth for science people.
Yeah. So actually, the people that started Story Collider broke off from the moth and started Story Collider. Yeah.
Collide.
Physics. Yeah, physicists started it. So that's where that came from. Yeah, that's a lot of fun.
And Mark, do you want to say anything about Science Tavern? I don't know if everybody knows about what Science Tavern is.
Well, Science Tavern is now 10 or 12-year-old public science outreach program that largely has taken place once a month just up the street from Horizon Theater at Manuel's Tavern. And by and large, we have research scientists like our 2 guests here come and talk about their ongoing research work to an audience that is mostly non-scientists, but people who love science.
Are you meeting now virtually now that we're in the pandemic world, or are you still?
This is, we tomorrow night we have a virtual meeting. It would have been our Manuel's Tavern night, and it's about Neanderthal DNA, and I'm not sure when we'll be able to return to in real life meetings, hopefully sometime within the year. That would be nice. But thanks to programs like Horizon Theater, we're able to continue to do events and bring people in on our calendar. So it's a pleasure to be able to participate.
We're excited to be one of your events next weekend.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that resonates with me about this play, and maybe our guests would speak to this to some extent, but a lot of times the general public don't know the pent-up enthusiasm that scientists have about talking about their work. And on the spur of the moment, they are very eager to do that. And that was one of the most authentic things I found about the play, is how each of them became almost instantaneously so enthusiastic about describing their work to anybody who would want to listen. And I'd like to find out whether that's your experience. That's basically been the fuel on which I've been running the Atlanta Science Tavern for 10 years, is this impetus that scientists feel about sharing what they're doing to anyone, almost anyone. Is that your experience, your personal experience too? Are you eager to talk about with the work that you do?
That's all I talk about.
Yeah.
That's all you talk about.
I do have to run off. I've got a tiny person who needs my attention.
Oh, thank you so much.
But
We're closing up. So great.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks for being here, and thank you, audience, for being here. Lisa, is there any last words you want to share?
Yeah, just if you enjoyed tonight, we've got Itamar and the cast tomorrow, and then next weekend we have two other sets of scientists. Mark Merlin is going to be with us on Friday or Saturday. I can't remember.
Saturday, the 3rd.
Next week. So come back, send people to see us. Our next thing after this is also running. You have access to, and it is access online to just the on-demand. So without this Talkback part, you can see it at any time. If you miss something, if you want to share it, send people to that. And it's like a joke. How many scientists does it take to change a light bulb? Never mind that, Brad says. Yes, thank you, Brad. And the next thing, we're working on now a Halloween thing that's going to be the Ghosts of Little 5 Points, a Halloween party for the dead and undead. So if you want something totally different, we're going to be doing an interactive storytelling with made-up ghosts Halloween party in late October. So completely different world. I'll be on top of it. So I think we're dropping in the chat. If you saw what you liked tonight, you want to support us, there's a thing for donating money to us. So if you feel like making a donation, we'd love to have it. And we'd love to have you just spread the word about us. You'll get a thank you email tomorrow. And it'll also have in it, there's a interview with Itamar that we're gonna, the Alliance did, because they had done that earlier this year, and we're sharing that with people in case you're interested in that. And we've got I think we're going to record this and put it online. So if people want to see their little talk back, they can watch it if Charles and Avani is good. All right. I think that's it. We're going to put some music up and let things close out. And special guests, you are awesome. Charlie, it was terrific to have you. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, Kellie and Nichole. And we'll see you soon. Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.